Okay, so there seems to be a bit of a lull in joining at the moment, so we'll kick off. I'm sure a lot of you will have been in the Oxford session, so this is going to run very much in the same vein. So if you want to ask questions to the chat, I can see that people are already doing that, which is great, but that's how we'll do it, and then I will field the questions to the panel. So just to introduce myself, I'm Molly. I'm the Access and Outreach Coordinator here in Cambridge. And then if you'd like to introduce yourselves, Rosanna.
Hello, I'm Rosanna and I've been teaching here in Cambridge for over 20 years. And I have a particular role with the 4-year degree, but I also teach very much on the 3-year degree. I'm a Director of Studies at 2 colleges, and have a lot of teaching experience here in Cambridge, so I can answer quite a broad range of questions.
Yep, Sally.
Hi, I'm Sally. I'm a first year 4-year classicist and I'm a Claire.
Daisy.
Hi, I'm Daisy and I'm a first year 4-year classicist at Gomblin Keys.
And Emma.
Hi, I'm Emma. I'm a first year 3-year classicist at Newnham College.
Fab. So I'm going to head to the chat and just ask a few questions. Okay. At Cambridge, I've studied Greek, but not Latin at A-level. Will I have to repeat learning Greek with the 4-year course? Rosanna, do you want to take that?
I'll jump right in. I think it's important that you flag that up in your application form. We do have facility for for people to be the exact parallel of what's sort of the norm on the 3-year degree, which is that people come with Latin A level but not Greek. So it's possible to be what we call intensive Latin. It would mean that you would need to sit the Greek at interview test when you came for interviews. But the official line is that you can do the 3-year course. For some candidates who are in your situation, it is the best thing to do the 4-year degree. If perhaps you've done Greek on your own or in a rather kind of wobbly way, then if I can put it in those terms, then sometimes it can be better to more in your academic interests to do the 4-year degree. So do give it a think. But if you have done A-level sort of all the way through and feel pretty secure in it, then it's certainly possible to apply for the 3-year degree, but it's important that you flag it up because it will put you in a slightly different category, but not a problematic one.
Okay, how much flexibility is there in terms of borrowing papers from other degrees? That might be Rosanna again.
Me again, okay, yeah, you're gonna get sick of listening to me. Not very much flexibility in the first 2 years, or indeed that would count as the first 3 years of the 4-year degree, although we are currently organising a system to ensure that there is more flexibility within classics in those years. When you go into part 2, so that's everyone's final year, then we have a list of, I think it's about 12 or 15 papers that come from other faculties and triposes, which classicists are allowed to take. They're kind of in the relatively obvious related things. So there's some papers from archaeology, some papers from the philosophy tripos, some English literature papers, history and philosophy of science, history of political thought. So there are ones that we kind of expect that classicists might be interested in, some of the language ones. So it's possible to take one of those as 25% of what you do in your final year. You also have the option in your final year to do a dissertation, which is also a 25% option. That dissertation can be very flexibly, the topic of it can be very flexibly chosen. So if you had a burning passion for, say, philosophy, you could take classical philosophy, you could take a philosophy paper from the philosophy faculty, and you could do a dissertation that was perhaps at least bridging between classics philosophy and philosophy. So you could get quite a bit of flexibility that way because the dissertation is also very flexible. We quite often have people who are supervised partly by somebody in a different faculty, partly by a classicist. So you could kind of end up in your final year with doing a sort of nearly 50% of that final year being on something that's kind of parallel to classics, but not actually, but not actually classics.
Okay, I'll come back to, so the next question is about affiliated students. So I'll come back to that at the end if we've got time. I'll stick with the more general ones for the moment. So I've got a question saying, I'm looking more at doing the arts in classics. I just want to know the balance between art itself and language. So maybe if some of the students can just talk a little bit about how you found the balance between the different aspects of the degree. Emma, kick off.
Well, I'm taking art as one of my modules in first year. So in your first term at Cambridge, you'll get an art lecture once a week, and one of the 8 essays you write will be on art. And if you choose to continue with art in your second degree, you're going to get art lectures twice a week, and then 2 of the 8 essays you write will be in art. So that's about the balance you're going to get.
And then in your final year, sorry if I can just add to that, you could, like I was saying, for philosophy, do almost exclusively art, partly through doing the classical version, also through what I said about dissertations. And I can't actually remember if one of our papers you can borrow from another faculty comes from, say, history of art. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it might well be possible. So you could, largely speaking, do kind of pretty much heading for 100% art and visual culture stuff in your final year.
Fab, thanks very much. So the next question is, I'm doing Latin at IB, but want to have a look at Greek in my spare time. Is looking at modern Greek beneficial, or should I dive into ancient Greek from the start? Rosanna, what do you think?
I mean, anything's beneficial. So if modern Greek is something that you have a, I don't know, a background in, or there's somebody who could do some teaching of it, then it's certainly not a bad thing. However, there is a very significant difference between modern Greek and ancient Greek. So if it is possible to start on ancient Greek, then I would say that's preferable. But as I said, any linguistic experience is valuable for giving you more language background within classics, but ancient Greek if you can.
Okay, we've had a couple of questions about additional needs. So what kind of support there is for people with autism or dyslexia. Does anyone want to say a little bit more about that?
If I could just quickly speak about my own personal experience with this sort of thing. I've currently been struggling with my college specifically to get a word processor for my exams. Essentially, I have real difficulties with my handwriting in terms of illegibility, and it's something that I've had for a number of years. So I think for me personally, a lot of it has been handled by my college rather than the faculty itself. I've asked the faculty for guidance in this, but it really, I mean, from my personal experience, it comes down to what your college says. So I'd say for my personal experience, I would say if you have particular needs with learning difficulties or exam access arrangements, I would speak to any potential colleges you're thinking of applying to, as well as the classics faculty, just to see what accommodations they can make. But that's just me.
Fab. So the next question is, how can I look at reading lists for classics, like good supercurricular books to read? So I'll just quickly jump in on that before I ask the others. So we do have a few reading lists on the website. So if you look under the schools and teacher section, there should be some reading lists there. We've also created some things, so like a reading web, which is slightly different and hopefully works to sort of support you in further reading a little bit more than a list. So I think what we like to encourage is you go where the feeling takes you. So if you like researching one particular area, go down that area, look at the things. There's no list of things that you absolutely should have read before you come to us. I think it's more personal than that. Does anyone else want to say anything about that? Yeah, go ahead.
I would suggest having a look at a website run by one of the classics faculty members. It's called Charlie's Language Page. and that has a lot of support for prospective classics students. So it has a reading list and it has like various suggestions depending on what your interest might be. So if you go on there, there's some very useful material.
Yeah, and there's also, I've just been reminded, so thank you, Emma, about the Classics for All research resources page. That's quite good, and it gives different levels for the different types of reading and resources as well. So that might be quite handy. What's next? I wondered if there was an option for a year abroad with the 3-year classics course. Rosanna?
No, there isn't as currently constituted. It's certainly possible to go on archaeological fieldwork in the vacations. And indeed, several of my colleagues are actively involved in digs and work overseas. And there's a meeting, actually, I think it happened last week, for students who might be interested in taking part in that. So those sort of additional things are certainly possible. We also have good links with the British School at Athens and the British School at Rome, and quite often some of our students go and do one of their summer courses. But again, it's within the confines of vacations, not something you can do as an additional year.
Okay, is Latin AS level still considered as a full Latin A level?
Me again, yeah. No, not really. So if you have just AS Latin and no Greek, then we would be pretty strongly directing you towards the 4-year degree, in which case you wouldn't be in a disadvantageous position. You'd be in quite an advantageous position having so much experience of Latin. Also, typically in the 4-year degree, there's a group which is made up of people who've done a mixture of GCSE and AS level, who sort of started a slightly faster pace at the beginning of their prelims year. So it wouldn't be that you were kind of marking time and having to start at the beginning if you're applying to the 4-year degree. If it were the case that you've actually done loads of Latin, and even though technically you've only got AS, actually we think you kind of strong enough to do the 3-year, and you have very strong reasons that it would be educationally advantageous to you, then it's worth discussing it with the college that you apply for. You'd probably in that instance be asked to take the same at-interview Latin test that all the 3 years do. And we certainly have had the situation in the past where candidates have taken both the assessment for the 4-year degree and the assessment for the 3-year degree, and then we've been in a conversation with them about what would be advantageous for them. So generally, no, and I think it's probably not in your interests, but it's not that we're kind of closed-minded to thinking about what would work best for you.
Okay, so the next question is, how many classics students do you get from outside of the UK? I feel like I should be able to answer this question, but I can't. I don't know if Rosanna, do you know?
I mean, I would have said quite a few. I guess the blinking Brexit, if I can call it that rather politely, rather than something stronger, has a little bit put paid to the sort of nice and steady stream of EU applicants we were getting. We still do get a decent smallish amount of EU and also some overseas. I mean, I guess just going off the top of my head, I would say maybe, I don't know, 10% or so of our undergraduates are not UK. A significantly bigger number at graduate level. So the faculty as a whole is includes quite a lot of non-UK people.
Fab, thank you. I'm going to mix up the order slightly so we can get the students in. Sorry, Rosanna. So for the students, how many hours of contact time do you have per week, and how many hours of independent study do you do? Sally, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, so in the first year of the 4-year classics course, I have 5 Latin lessons a week, 2 Greek lessons, and then 3 supervisions relating to that. So that adds up to 10 hours, along with about 2 hours of lectures a week. And then in terms of independent study, I probably don't do as much as I should. I probably do about 15 to 20 hours a week, optimistically.
That's great, thank you. what kind of supercurricular activities are advised or suggested that we could participate in?
I mean,
Yeah, go ahead, Emma.
At least this is from my experience. I don't feel that the faculty is looking for any specific activities. Like, if you come to interview, you won't be judged on the basis of your extracurriculars. I think showing interest in your subject is positive. So like, if you can show that like you've read around your subject, or say like you've participated in some sort of like classic society or anything, that's all good. But I think showing keen academic interest is the most important. Extracurriculars relating to your subject are a plus, but definitely not obligatory.
Yeah, fab, thanks for that. So in terms of what you do now, maybe let's just talk about like the activities you kind of do at college, just to give a bit of a flavour of the sort of extracurricular stuff you do now you are in Cambridge. Daisy, do you want to go?
I think I saw someone in the chat say I'm an artist, and they were wondering if they could continue anything like that at Cambridge. I am also very keen on my art. I think Rosanna can probably attest that I do one too many whiteboard drawings in the faculty. But I'm very keen on art myself. I did an art foundation before I came to Cambridge. I did an A-level and GCSE in art, and there are certainly opportunities to continue doing that while studying classics. For example, there is a lot of work, obviously, with the degree, but you've got more than enough time to explore any extracurricular activities you'd like. So, for example, particularly with art, the Architecture Society run a live drawing class every Friday. That is welcome to every single student. I think you've got to pay a fee if you're not doing architecture, working on it, but you can still, there are so many different activities you can do at Cambridge. It really is just as far as you want to take it. And certainly coming from an artistic background, there is so much you can do. So that is not something I would be worried about.
Yeah, that's really nice to hear. I just wanted to maybe Sally and Emma, you can just say a bit about the sort of things you do outside as well, just to give that range.
I'm currently on my college orchestra, and I also write for a student journal. So that's kind of what I do in my free time.
I do quite a few things. I was part of like the amateur choir, did a bit of rowing, did bell ringing, which I didn't even know was a thing before coming here. It's quite fun. Also part of a few things like Astronomy Society. I'm part of Math Society. Don't know if I'd recommend that for classicists, but it's kind of fun. And a couple of like environmental societies as well.
If I could quickly also jump back in on that, as well as doing art as well, something I'd recommend, I also do Cam FM, which is the student-run radio station here in Cambridge. Super fun. If any of you are interested in anything radio-wise or like even performing arts, Cam FM is great. And I also do the Magic the Gathering Society, which is incredibly random. Would recommend. It's just like there is so much you can do, and like something I was really worried about before I applied to Cambridge was, are there going to be things to do outside of my degree? Is it just going to be staying inside reading books all day? And I can assure you that is most certainly not the case.
Yeah, so like that's just 3 students there, and they've all had, you know, quite a variety of different extracurriculars. So take confidence from that. There's a lot going on in Cambridge. Okay. I'm interested in doing a joint modern and medieval course. I'm doing both Latin and French at A-level. Would there be a lot of repetition for the first few terms if I were to study both at Cambridge? Rosanna?
No, not at all. You could only do Latin if you have done it at A-level, which it says that you said that you have. If you wanted to start ancient Greek, it would be possible to do that as one of the languages. You'd still only be allowed to do 2 languages. So it's possible to have one language that's post A-level and one language that's ab initio. But currently we can only offer Greek as being the ab initio language. But to do both French and Latin post A-level would be absolutely possible, and there wouldn't be any repetition. You have some degree of choice about how much of the other areas of classics you do. You kind of have to do some language, have to do a reasonable bit of literature, but there's options to also do ancient culture stuff as well, so history or art and archaeology or whatever. So it's possible to make it a kind of pretty 50-50 degree, also possible for it to be rather more LL, and maybe about a third Latin, focused mostly on language and literature.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm taking international A-levels, but Latin isn't available in my country as an A-level subject. My school's been doing AP Latin instead, and I have been self-studying the A-level syllabus. Will I be eligible for the 3-year course? So I think we've kind of covered this, but Rosanna, do you want to just...
Yeah, so just to repeat really quickly, flag it up to the college that you're applying for. You'd be asked to do the at-interview test for the 3-year candidates. If we feel that your Latin is at a standard that it would be that you could cope and you'd be happy doing that course, then yes, that would definitely be enough. If on the other hand we feel that you've loads of potential but you just haven't done enough to mean that that would be the right course for you, then we'd probably encourage you to think about the 4-year course. In my experience, I think people who have done AP and then have kind of worked quite a bit themselves usually do the 3-year course.
Emma?
And I came into Cambridge with AP Latin, and I was fine doing the 3-year course. And I wouldn't worry about the Cambridge course being too tied to the A-level Latin syllabus, because you're not expected to have studied the A-level syllabus in particular to start the course. So you should be fine on the AP.
Thank you. Okay, how might a gap year affect your application, and how would you advise maintaining a high level of study during this year? Yeah, Daisy?
So I myself, I was a reapplicant to Cambridge. I applied and got rejected from Newnham and then reapplied to Keys and took a gap year in between. As I've mentioned before, I did an art foundation over that gap year. But one thing I would really recommend to people considering taking a gap year is to keep up the classical studies in the background. For me personally, because I had a Latin GCSE, but I don't have ancient Greek or anything. I took Latin lessons, so very informally. I wasn't looking at particularly the A-level or GCSE syllabus. It was mainly just looking at the very basics, familiarizing myself with that again. And also reading translation, text and translation was really helpful. So actually, in particular, I'd recommend, everyone has a different way of pronouncing it, but the loop, yeah, that one. Read those because they're fantastic, because you get the translation and the original text alongside. And as someone who had like basically no language experience before coming to Cambridge, it was really helpful just to sort of, it was a really helpful starting point just to keep my classics up over the course of the gap year, especially in preparation for interview as well. But I guess if you had got an offer and then you took a gap year, as I know a lot of people do, yeah, I would just recommend trying to keep up that sort of, it doesn't have to be anything too intense, but just making sure that you've still, you're taking part in classics, even in a sort of smaller way.
Thanks. Okay, is it possible to transfer to a different course like philosophy after 1 or more years in classics? Rosanna?
Yes, it is possible. Slightly harder to transfer at the end of your first year, because the end of your first year is 1A, which is not it's kind of half of a part, if that makes sense. Easier to transfer at the end of your second year, where you've done a full part 1, including a part 1A and a part 1B. So at that point, it's relatively unproblematic. If there are strong reasons for thinking that you'd be far better off doing philosophy than continuing with classics, then chances are your director of studies would try to help see if it was possible to transfer it after 1A. I mean, we have these kind of hopefully exciting, often quite tough, but in a good way, degrees. We want people to be enjoying them, thriving, working hard, but feeling fulfilled by doing them. So while there are significant rules and technicalities that the university imposes on us, we're also very focused on trying to make your time in Cambridge fulfilling and successful. So we'd probably try to facilitate something if it looked significantly more in your interests to be able to do that, but might be a little bit harder at 1A than after 1B. Might depend a bit on the way that the philosophy tripos is structured.
Fab. Do you need an A-level in the language you want to study for classics and a modern language? In my case, Russian.
So kind of like the answer I gave before, if you're planning to do MMLL and have one of your languages being a classical language, then that's perfectly possible if your modern language is post A-level and if your ancient language would be Greek. Unfortunately, we can't take students with the post A-level modern language and ab initio Latin. It's to do with the way that the courses kind of match up or don't really match up, which is a real shame. But it would certainly be possible to do, say, Russian and Greek, which actually would work very well together.
Okay, how much Greek are we expected to come with for the 3-year course with A-level Latin?
You can start the 3-year course with absolutely no Greek, and you will be fine. Because I'm 3-year course, I'm on the post GCSE track, but you can come and do the 3-year course with any level of Greek. They will usually recommend like a summer school to you. You'll start learning Greek there, and if you have some Greek already, that's a great plus. But once you start your degree, you'll be sorted into like small groups of roughly the same ability, and the teachers will just work with you to like get the most out of your time there. So.
Great, thank you. How does the path from undergrad to masters progress? Whew, we're thinking ahead here. Rosanna?
Is that me again? Yes, pretty smoothly. Standard offer for Cambridge undergraduates is that they need to get over 67% in their finals. And if a Cambridge undergraduate in classics wants to stay on to do a master's in classics, then they usually do get an offer. But as I said, with that condition, so over 67, which is a high 2-1, and I think they have to have an agreed first in one of their papers. But we expect a decent chunk of our undergraduates to want to go on to masters. As with any transition between undergraduate and master's level study, in many ways the hardest thing is getting funding. So you'd need to, that's often the thing that is super competitive. The actual academic transition is comparatively straightforward. I mean, it's still very competitive, of course, but it's the funding that to support doing a master's that can sometimes be a stumbling block.
Okay, is mythology a large part of the degree? I've been interested in myths from a young age, and that's what I'd like to specialize in. So yeah, I just wondered maybe the students could say a bit about what they've found. Sally?
I mean, it's all kind of all entwined together. So for example, this term for the 4-year students have been studying Ovid's Metamorphoses, which is just entirely about the myths. So we've sort of been doing that for 5 hours a week. So while you might not explicitly have a topic on mythology, as it were, it's very much entwined in pretty much everything you do.
For the 3-year course, we don't have like a course in mythology per se, but I find you'll discuss it quite a lot if you do the art and archaeology or the literature, because it's so much of that is infused with myths. So you will be discussing mythology and thinking about those stories.
Fab. For the MML and classics course, can you do it if you're fluent/semi-fluent in the modern language, but didn't do an A-level as a result? It's probably Rosanna again.
Yes, sorry, I'm probably getting bored of listening to me. So on one level, that would depend if you had an A-level in the classical language that you're wanting to take. I think if you did have an A-level in the classical language, so Latin, for instance, then it would be totally unproblematic. You'd be applying for Latin post A-level and an ab initio modern language, which, as it would turn out, you'd be not ab initio at, so you'd have a kind of strong a strong track record in that subject, even though you didn't have an A level in it. I think if you were planning for your modern language to count as the post A level one, that's the kind of question which it would probably be better to direct towards an MMLL Director of Studies or admissions tutor. It might, I would well imagine that it's something that they'll have had to think about before, because it's by no means uncommon to have pretty much native speakers in certain languages, but who haven't necessarily done an A level. But I think whether technically they can admit you without an A level in either of the two languages, even though you're a very strong speaker of that language, I think would be a question you'd have to direct towards MMLL. I'm sorry not to be able to be more categorical than that.
Yep, and the emails for them will be on their website. It's quite easy to find that out as well. Just to flag, Daisy has answered in the chat about the LRBs. The spelling is there in her comment, and they're quite small. They're green for Greek and red for Latin. They're quite distinctive. So you should, there you go. On the ball, love it. Okay. Okay, if the students can pick this one up. So how many opportunities are there to interact with students from other courses?
Loads. Because most likely you will be living with people in your household who are not doing the same course as you. Like, I'm the only classicist in my household, so I spend most of my time with like engineers, English students, Natskis. So while you're living with college, you will spend lots of your time with people from outside your course and in your extracurriculars as well. So you don't have to be worried about being isolated in a classics bubble or anything.
Fab, thank you, Emma. So we've, Sally, did you want to come in there?
I was just going to second what Emma was saying. So for example, in my year at my college, I'm the only 4-year classicist, and there's only one other 3-year classicist. So there are 126 other people that we spend a lot of time with who don't do anything related to classics. So it's really nice, like you're completely friends with people from all walks of life and all different subjects. And in fact, a lot of people know far more people from other subjects than they do from classics.
Cool. So a few questions now about the at-interview assessment. So the first person said, are there separate exams to get into Cambridge specific to classics? So the answer to that would be the at-interview assessment. So Rosanna, if you would just mind talking about that a little bit.
Of course, yes. So it's not what you might think of as a separate exam to get into Cambridge. It's an additional piece of information that helps us assess your strengths. So the thing that we would admit you on would still be very much your A levels. That's what your conditional offer will be based upon. But we'll also use the how you perform in the at-interview assessments to inform our picture of you, just as we would use things like the written work that we ask you to submit, to a certain extent your personal statement, although because we will be interviewing a lot of our candidates, I would say that the personal statement is probably less important than it might be at other universities where they're not going to interview. So if you're applying post A level in either Latin or Greek, the at-interview assessment is a passage of Latin or Greek, and it's an unseen, not too difficult, very much keyed to the A level syllabus in terms of vocabulary, not in terms of what type of Latin or Greek it is, but in terms of vocabulary. And it's perfectly possible for people who aren't doing A levels to get hold of the OCR AS vocabulary list, which is what we use, and that vocabulary, which is mainstream vocabulary, would no doubt dovetail very well with, and it does, with IB and with other courses that people are taking. So they are straight unseen translations. For 4-year degree, we do something slightly different. That's not a written exercise, it's a live session. I do these, as do my close colleagues. There's also a PhD student sitting in, if it's online, which we assume it will be. And in that session, we screen share some material with you. if you've done GCSE, Latin or Greek, or have a bit of a background in Latin or Greek, then we might look at some Latin or Greek sentences, but to translate them together. We're principally interested in seeing how you kind of make patterns, make links, how you can kind of work out where you've gone wrong with, say, looking at one of those Latin or Greek sentences, not that you can do it perfectly. For people who have no Latin or Greek experience, which is the majority of the people who apply for the 4-year course, then we look at some material in English. So we're looking at grammatical ideas. We're looking at, again, pattern spotting, kind of attention to detail over linguistic issues. I'm pretty sure that there are some examples of the kind of material that we use in the apt interview assessments on the website, and that's right, Molly, isn't it? And if I can just kind of, in a sense, reiterate that going back to the stuff that we would do based around English grammar, we're not looking for it all to be perfect. You know, sometimes some of the people who do really well are the people who make mistakes. But then when I say in that session, oh, just think a bit more about it. What about this? You know, have you noticed this? Who can then kind of quickly rethink and quickly recalibrate. You know, that skill to sort of not know it all, not have it all perfect, but to be able to kind of think quickly on your feet with it is often one that we're looking for. And because it's a live session, it can be more interactive, which is, I think, a positive.
Yeah, Daisy, go ahead.
Yeah, so just adding on to what Rosanna said, I did the 4-year course at interview assessment with a few Latin sentences because I had a GCSE in Latin. On the Classics faculty website when I applied, so it should still be on there, it was only a year ago, but there should be some Latin sentences specifically for if you've had exposure to Latin before university but aren't at an A-level standard. And I saw someone in the chat just now asking about how to prepare for those exams. They were a bit worried from my personal experience for the 4-year course. If you've got some Latin experience, I think it's really worth trying to find some tutoring or just to find someone who has Latin experience to maybe look at the sentences with you that are on the Classics faculty website and to see what sort of things they're going to be, what sort of things you don't know, what sort of things you feel like you need to practice. But at the end of the day, don't worry too much because I personally, I can tell you my language interview was not flawless. And it is, as Rosanna said, it's mainly just to see how you react to mistakes or how quickly you can learn to improve your translation. So do not worry if you don't know all of the vocabulary, all of the any of that stuff. It's mainly just to see how you react and how you can figure it out with the help of a tutor, which is very similar to what you would be doing in a Cambridge supervision anyway.
Yeah, and there was also a question saying, are the Oxford language aptitude past papers good practice for the interview assessment? And I think they are pretty similar. So if you do have those papers available, you can also look through those. Maybe Emma and Sally, you could just say a bit about how you personally prepared.
Yeah, so my school was quite helpful with it, and I did do a few of the Oxford Oriental Languages admission test papers, and I think they were actually quite a bit harder than what happened in the Cambridge language aptitude interview. But like Daisy, I had a GCSE in Greek instead of Latin, so I had Greek sentences. So I just kind of revised, brushed up a bit on my Greek, and I think that was pretty much it.
All right, so I interviewed for the 3-year course, and I would suggest get a good basis in your vocabulary and like really try to develop a familiarity with like common constructions, because like in like the usages, if you have Latin, like the usages of the cases, uses of the subjunctive, because when I interviewed, they gave me passage of Latin text and they asked me to like translate it on the spot, and they would like sometimes ask me like some couple pointed grammar questions, like, you know, explain why they're using this word. So I think just facility with the vocab is very important, and if you can practice Latin unseen, I would definitely recommend that.
Great, thank you all. Okay, do the 2 pieces of work you give in for your application need to be assessed/marked essays? Rosanna?
Not necessarily. We're also quite happy for things to be not not necessarily classics. So people who are doing A levels, we might expect, and particularly perhaps if they're doing classical civilization A level, we might expect there to be at least one of the two pieces to be on a classical theme. But it's quite standard for us also to have, say, an English literature essay or a history essay. And obviously, particularly for people who aren't doing classical subjects, then we would expect them to be in related disciplines. Now, in an ideal world, yes, it is a marked piece, really, because we're trying to kind of assess how much help and support you've had with it. Your teacher has to fill out something saying, you know, oh, they had 3 months to write this and I spoke to them 5 times, or more often, they had a tiny bit of help, or I walked in and gave them a task to do to the class at the beginning of a lesson. They had no preparation at all. And we tried to be kind of flexible about the circumstances. So your teacher does have to also say the circumstances in which the piece of work was done. But then also if it's marked, we can see a sense of what kind of feedback and support you've had with it. But if you have material that hasn't been marked, then that's fine. What we're looking for is a good example of your writing skills and your interests in classics. We'll use it to have a bit of a look at what your writing's like. We'll also use it a bit to think about areas for the interview where you might be quite confident, because we're often looking for questions that we can ask where we know that you know something, we know that you're hopefully quite happy to talk about that, because we want you to feel relaxed, feel that you're on some degree of familiar territory, because we then might well ask you in the second half of the interview, might well ask you stuff that isn't material you've come across. But if we start too hard with tricky stuff you've never thought about, then we find out less. So starting with questions that ask about A-level material you're studying, which ask about the questions that come out of your essays that you've sent in, can often be a way of kind of starting on material that we think you have some familiarity with. So be aware that we might well ask questions that come off it. So that's one of the things that we're looking for when we ask for these submitted essays. Sorry, I feel like I've kind of answered in a slightly roundabout way. I hope that kind of answered the question.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I think it's important to kind of just say as well, with the submitted work and with interviews, we're not trying to catch you out. That's not the purpose of it. It's a conversation. And I think as well, it's an opportunity for you to experience a bit of Cambridge teaching in that interview, which is nice. It goes 2 ways. Obviously, we're officially interviewing you and assessing you, but then you're also assessing us about whether you would actually like to come here. So I think that's really important to remember as well. So I think that's the end of the questions in the chat. Does anyone else have? Okay. Can you submit a classics EPQ, or is that too long?
You should probably check with the college that you're applying to. Some are quite relaxed about you submitting something quite big. They may only say that we will promise to read all of it. Other colleges, I think, relatively explicitly don't want you to submit something as long as that. I think they'd probably be happy with something that was a section of your EPQ, especially if that could stand alone. But it's worth checking with the director of studies in the college that you've applied to.
Yeah, Daisy, did you have a different experience?
Yeah. I actually used part of my EPQ. I'm not sure if it was the first time I applied or the second time I applied. I might have used it both times, but I definitely used a section of my EPQ, and I think my EPQ was about 8,000 words long. So obviously you don't want to be submitting something that long. So I ended up submitting the discussion point, which is, I don't know if it's structured differently for different sixth forms, but that was about 2,000 words long, I want to say. And that was basically just the meat of the question of because the main thing I think that your interviewers want to see is your analytical skills and how, as Rosanna said, how you write an essay. So the discussion, if I was to recommend a part of your EPQ to submit, I would recommend submitting the discussion part, because that's most relevant to why you're applying.
Okay, we had some panic that I was going to skip the affiliated student question, so thank you for reminding me. Could you tell us more about studying as an affiliated student? As an affiliated student, do I get a normal BA degree at the end of the studies? What are the prerequisites to be admitted as an affiliated student? Rosanna.
Is that me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So you will have normally you have to have done a BA already before applying to us. It's called a second BA. excuse me. In my experience, this is often done by students who have perhaps gone to universities and in different overseas university systems where perhaps their degrees are significantly broader. So a candidate may well have done quite a bit of classics, even sort of majored in classics, but as part of a degree that contained a broad range of areas. So for them to have got to the end of their BA degree, and although that had some significant focus on classics, it wouldn't say be the equivalent of a full degree in classics. So we quite often have students from the US system, for instance, who want to narrow down, more narrowly focus on classics, perhaps then with a view to wanting to apply for a master's or for a PhD. Standardly, the BA is a 2-year part 2. So it's like doing the final year, but you have 2 years to do it, and you need to do slightly more than people do it in 1 year. And then, as I said, you get a second BA. And I've taught quite a few students in that situation who have done it very successfully and who've also been really kind of interesting additions to our faculty. So it's something that's looked on positively.
Fab. Okay. So if we do an essay competition, can we submit that as our written work? I think the answer to that's yes. Yep. And then if I haven't done a language prior, apart from at GCSE, would I still be able to do ancient Greek with Russian?
I think, like I said before, if you're planning to do a post-A level, you have to have, if you plan to do MMLL, one language has to be post-A level. If you're a native speaker in Russian, then, as I said before, it might be possible to be in touch with MML and see if that counts as the equivalent of an A level. But I believe that the standard pattern is that you need to be post A level in one of the 2 languages that you're taking, regardless of whether those 2 languages are both within MML or one in MML and one in classics.
Great. Is the classics essay competition something that you can put in your personal statement? Yeah, you can do if you would like. That's a nice thing to sort of show that you're engaged with classics, but not essential. You don't have to be doing lots of essay competitions and that sort of thing. Okay, and one for the students. How difficult do students doing a 4-year degree find it socially with their peers who are on a 3-year course? And also, do you get accommodation for the prelim year and all of the other years of your course? Sally?
So I'd say that it's not at all difficult. You're because accommodation and everything is dealt with by the college. And as far as the college is concerned, you're just another first year. So, you know, I'm in halls with all the other first years. It doesn't really matter until 4th year when lots of my friends would have left. But then again, lots of people in the college also do 4-year degrees or more, like engineering or languages or medicine. So I don't think there's much of a difference at all for me personally.
Yeah, Rosanna, did you want to go?
Could I just quickly jump in there? And, you know, I've taught loads and loads of year groups of the prelim students. In fact, we're kind of going to be heading for our 20-year anniversary fairly soon. And my experience of it is that the 4-year course in their first year are a tight-knit bunch. They make really strong friendships. They also, as Sally says, meet loads of people in their college, other first years in all sorts of subjects. Then the new 1As arrive the following year, who you're sort of in a year group with. Often, you know, those are also strong relationships. You talk quite a lot in your 2nd and 3rd year. And then as quite a lot of your friends that you've matriculated with in your 4th year leave, then very often the 4-year degree friendships become super important all over again. I've quite often had students who've maybe lived together in their final year or who go on to graduate work together, and those 4-year degree friendships remain really, really powerful ones. So I feel that the 4-year degree cohort is a kind of addition to all of the other stuff. There's no problem with integrating with a 3-year classicist, absolutely no problem with having loads of friends who are engineers and musicians and natural scientists and all that kind of stuff. But the 4-year degree cohort is a really valuable backstop that follows you through your years of the degree, which really pleases me.
Yeah, Daisy.
Yeah, just basically seconding everything that's been said here. Also, one thing that I would keep in mind if you're thinking of applying for the 4-year course is make sure that your college provides accommodation for your 4th year. I'm pretty sure that most do, but it is something worth checking, because you don't want to get to your sort of 4th year and then find you've got to find accommodation somewhere in Cambridge outside of your college. And the other thing is, you've also, if you're doing the 4-year course, you've got the Latin summer school before terms actually starts in your 1st year. Which is literally just the 4-year classics cohort in the classics faculty. There's like 1 or 2 PhD students, but it's mainly just you. And then that's a really good opportunity to make friends and before term even starts. So when even like in comparison to my 3-year course, people in my college, I'd already made like friends with people before term had even started. So in comparison to the view of like, oh, if you're on the 4-year course, you'll have difficulty making friends, I'd actually argue that you're more likely to make friends on the 4-year course. Not saying that that's a reason why you should apply for one or the other, but that is something I most certainly would not worry about if you're thinking of applying for the 4-year course.
Fab, thank you very much. I think that's sort of come to the natural end of the questions now. If you do have any more questions, then you're welcome to email me on that access email address. I'm just putting it in the chat now. So if you want to just take that down, it's also on the website, so that should be absolutely fine to find, and you can ask us anything you like about application or life here in Cambridge. So thank you for coming along. You have now, I believe, some like access to college tours and that sort of thing, and the live stream will continue with the lectures, so that's over on YouTube, back where the first talk was. So yeah, thank you very much for coming, and enjoy the rest of the day.